Ladies and gentlemen, here we are on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and with me is a returning guest, although he did not join us here on his first appearance with me. He joined me on Esoteric America, a podcast that you may have seen in this RSS feed recently, and we've been going strong for a few months now. He came in and smashed episode 8, told us all about Wisconsin, and I can't think of a better person than Jeff to tell us about this, because he's the co-host of a podcast called the Wisconsin Legends podcast. His Instagram is called Badger Lane Legends, and this is sort of like, forgive me if I forgot, but this is also the name of like a YouTube, Instagram, where you're going to be putting some content. Is it just Instagram, or do you have plans to make Badger Lane Land Legends like a podcast or a YouTube show?
Yeah, so right now, Badgerland Legends it started as Instagram. I've since expanded it to Facebook, and I also have badgerlandlegends.com where I post more long-form content. And on top of that, me and my podcast partner do the Wisconsin Legends podcast.
Right on.
So that's kind of the three legs of the stool there.
Thank you. Yes, and I forgive me for mixing that up a little bit. I wasn't
No problem.
quite sure, but I knew there was a podcast in there somewhere, and this is more of a blog investigation, sort of highlighting some of the mysterious things. And it's not just paranormal cryptid stuff. I mean, you guys have gone into sort of true crime territory as well. The Dahmer case is extremely popular nowadays.
Yeah. Netflix really gave that a bump.
Yeah,
and,
I'm sure.
Dahmer, one of the most mystic places in Wisconsin, Devil's Lake, the aptly named Devil's Lake.
Wow. So we're going to be talking about this today because I feel like, it's in the consciousness. We planned on doing an episode way before Netflix released that show.
Yeah.
And it's funny how, the general concept of the paranormal, I feel like at first, or used to be, a little more one note, right? It was about the people and the experiences and what they're experiencing. But I think now we're seeing the evolution of the paranormal research, and it's including things like conspiracy theories. It's including things like psychic geography and maybe even ancient cultural magic, occult magic from different various cultures that have been in that specific place where you're experiencing a ghost phenomena or cryptid phenomena. And I think you're an example of somebody who's on the forefront of this, because you're integrating Synchro-Mysticism into this research, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's really what I talk about what I want to talk with you about tonight is kind of how can we access, the weirder stuff, the more esoteric stuff. And you started the top of the show talking about Esoteric America and kind of giving me that assignment to go out and maybe not look for it, but maybe curate more of, where the city around me, the place, and kind of become familiarized because, me and Mark were 1,000 miles away talking over a Skype connection. And it's easy to get lost in the virtual, but one thing I advocate for is actually getting out into the actual place. So separating that virtual from the physical world.
And I got to thank you for that because, that is the intention of Esoteric America. And you did a very good job of helping us understand not just Wisconsin, but the specific part of Wisconsin. We focused on Madison, and I was really blown away to see how watery that particular, place is. Because in my mind, I think Wisconsin, I think Midwest, I think pasture land, right? That's kind of the trope we get. But it's right on the Great Lakes, and Madison itself is like smack dab in the middle of two bodies of water. It's like a peninsula type.
It's an isthmus, and it's the only capital on an isthmus in the world.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's even, I don't think we covered that, or at least we didn't mention that fun fact there, but wow, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, the isthmus is, it came up in another conversation that I had with Topher recently, where he discussed how Panama being an isthmus has this sort of huge, energy convergence going on. You have all the water of the Pacific and all the water of the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico on either sides of this small little strip of land that is coast. Is it Costa Rica and Panama? I always get confused if one of those is an island. I'm pretty sure both of those are the Panama, right? Panama is what I'm thinking of. Anyways, not to get too carried away with Central American geography. There's something about it. Like we notice these particular features, whether it's an isthmus, whether it's a city on top of a mound, there are these things that seem to rhyme. There's patterns. And once you start to identify, okay, Madison's built like this, you can see where they all fit into a larger picture. So we're going to be kind of covering a little bit of that here today, but we're not confined the way we are on Esoteric America to just one place. So let's get into it, man. Where do you want to start?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what really started it for me was this quote. So this is kind of an obscure quote from an obscure book, and I got the book right in front of me. It's called Wisconsin Lore. My mom brought this book home. I was probably 8, and inside the cover, or in one of the first chapters, it says Wisconsin contains, if the yarns are any indication, more ghosts per square mile than any state in the nation. So growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, you're really not exposed to anything outside of, your home, your neighborhood, your town. And then to stumble upon a quote like this, it kind of opens up the world, and you kind of think, wow, there's more to this place than what it's letting on. So ever since reading that, I was kind of captivated. And I think I've always been inclined towards kind of the weird stuff. I was that kid talking about ghosts on the playground. I'd be the fly on the wall at the dinner parties whenever the conversations switched to, ghosts or the afterlife, and was kind of captivated by it. And then I was checking out the spooky, or I guess they'd be like cryptid books from the Catholic school library, and kind of reading more into it, and kind of a self-guided exploration into this stuff, ever since a young age. And, once it kind of gripped me, I ventured off, and then I kind of found myself back into this stuff about 2 years ago, about a few months before the pandemic really kicked off.
Now, help us understand this phrase a little bit. If the yarns are an indication, is that a reference to like some sort of superstitious practice, like people tying yarns together?
So the title of the book's Wisconsin Lore.
Right.
So yarn would be an oral telling of a story.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Spinning a yarn.
The verb would
I've
be
heard
yarning,
that.
or a yarn would be a story, or spinning a yarn is kind of a colloquial term for telling a story.
I've heard that. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yes, this makes a lot more sense now. For a second, I got carried away with like looms and weaving and all that. So okay.
You're weaving a story.
Right,
you're painting a tapestry with your words. Spinning. Maybe you told stories around the loom back in the day.
Absolutely.
But it was a thing that really captivated me, and thought there's something weird about Wisconsin. And boy, is there.
It's interesting because, where I'm from, we have a lot of hype about our ghost scene. But if I remember correctly, you probably have equal, if not more, haunted houses and haunted locations in Wisconsin than we do here in the whole of New England. So, yeah, very haunted.
Yeah, I feel like New England as a landmass, the 6 states, are probably a front runner for ghost lores and tales, just because of the history there.
Right.
Because in the historic buildings, and there's still a lot of old buildings here, but our old buildings are probably, up to 150 years old. But where you go out into New England, I mean, those could be from the 1600s, right?
Not many of those are still standing,
Probably not,
but
but at
some
least
things are
landmarks
from
and
that long ago. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
landmarks and folklore, and Plymouth Rock, and what is the one tower out there?
Newport Tower.
The Newport Tower. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of lore and stuff like that. And surprisingly, looking back, Wisconsin was discovered probably in the 1650s by French explorers. So there's still a rich history here with the French, and the Jesuits were kind of their travel partners because they would kind of come along and kind of spread their gospel. And through your conversation with Mr. Exertus, he kind of revealed, kind of the Jesuits kind of infiltrating these cultures and finding out their rituals and kind of covertly discovering the practices and documenting them. And I found that kind of an interesting thread to pull on that. I definitely need to explore more. But because, being from Wisconsin, you think, French discovered it. A lot of the Catholic Jesuits came over here and, started their monasteries and their churches. But I never really thought more about that until he mentioned that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have a genealogical connection to French Canada, so it's definitely something that feels like I'm meant to know more about, in a certain sense. But that is a point that we needed to make. That we get a lot of attention on the East Coast for how old it is here, but I mean, the whole land is the same age, technically, and people have been walking all over this North American continent for thousands and thousands of years, not just indigenous groups, but Europeans. We have all kinds of stories of maybe even like Romans going into the Great Lakes and taking out all that missing copper, or even like Phoenicians, who knows who else. So yeah, this place is very old. The French have been there since about as long as the French have been in the New World. They went pretty far, pretty fast.
Yeah. So that's really my entrance into this. So I kind of wanted to look in deeper into the weird and finding more and accessing it and see how we could kind of integrate that into our life to kind of enhance it. And then, you got to start with why, and why should you even look for this stuff? And I think for me, accessing the weird reminds us that life isn't mundane. It reminds us there is a purpose, and not everything is as it seems. I think it also helps us gain a sense of identity, belonging to where we are, that place. And I think it brings us in relationship with our surroundings. And then one little phrase that I picked up from the Pennyroyal season 1 was, is it the people that define a place, or does place define a people? And I've kind of rolled that one over back and forth in my mind. And I think it's, a chicken or the egg thing. And I think it's more of a thought experiment than anything else.
I love that. Yeah, I've been fascinated, obviously, by this stuff. I mean, anyone who listens to the podcast knows that this is a topic that I'm very interested in, right? And we share this interest. It's become a big, I think, point to make ever since people started talking about Tartaria. It's like, for me, it was like, okay, here's like a theory for what may have happened that we don't know about, but like, let's just go and look and see what's there. Because my suspicion was maybe there's something that's closer to home, that's been right under our nose the whole time. Like it doesn't need some Russian faraway explanation. There's something here that we could find that maybe has been mislabeled, misidentified, right? And as soon as I had that suspicion, I was immediately gratified by like hundreds of things. Like, oh, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this. Oh, I've seen these my whole life. I didn't know what they were. Like, as soon as you start looking around, you find that the things that maybe you took for granted are so much weirder, right? Like one example that's seems like so mundane, like people literally trip over them, is the stone walls. You know, they're just like all over the place here in New England. And most people would, like I said, just trip right over them, not notice them, maybe think that somebody built them in the last 400 years. But no, they're so old, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, everybody thinks, oh, it's just a farmer's root cellar.
Right.
And then, you know, when they dig into it and they find the astrological alignments, and it's like, well, if it was really a root cellar, would somebody have gone to line this up with the winter solstice? I mean, that seems absurd that, you know, a farmer would be that observant to do something like that with something so utilitarian as a root cellar. So yeah, and I think, you know, this stuff is worth exploring.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and kind of one of the theses I came up with recently, and there was an old Joe Rogan video I stumbled upon, and this was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, before he was, you know, kind of the dynamo that he is today. And he was talking about boxes. So I came up with this kind of inspired by that conversation. And it goes, we live in a box. We hop into our gas powered box. We drive to our climate controlled box to work. When we're done with work, we may stop at our favorite sports box or big box store. At home, we'll either spend time staring into a box we keep in our pocket or a 60-inch box that we hang on our wall. Only to retire to our mattress and box spring, and eventually end up in a pine wood box. So I think we live in a cyclical, round, enchanted realm. And these structural straight lines that we use for these boxes are imposed upon us. So I think we need to break out of these boxes. And it's easy to forget that we live in this enchanted realm. So that's kind of my TED Talk.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have to remind myself all the time that, you know, this podcast is enchanting, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, I'm staring in a box, right? Yeah. You know, but no, it's absolutely deceptive, you know. I didn't really put it together like that, but it kind of reminds me of Saturn Cube now that you have this cube photo up. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that was kind of my mission, was to like, okay, how do we kind of break out of these boxes, kind of access the weird in our world? Now, I was captivated by another quote, and this is from John Keel. He is what you would call a Fortean author. You might know him best from the Mothman Prophecies. And he says in his book, The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, which is a great name for a book, no matter where you are, someone within 200 miles of your home has had a direct confrontation with a frightening apparition or inexplicable monster within the last generation. And I found that captivating, because I think it's through these stories that we access this weirdness. And I think it's part of the human experience to look beyond what we see. So I thought that was kind of a captivating quotation. And where should we start when looking for this stuff? I think you should start where you are. I know I was inspired by your kind of psychogeographical journey through your hometown of New Haven. I did a similar thing with Madison when I was doing the Esoteric America. And one thing I wanted to do was, when I moved to a new city called Waunakee, Wisconsin. It's a northern suburb of Madison. So where you have the isthmus of the capital of Madison, you have a lake to the north or a lake to the south. Waunakee is directly north of the top lake, the northern lake. And when I moved to the city, I got onto one of those local Facebook pages where people, they pretty much bitch about politics or somebody not cleaning up their dog shit off the sidewalk or whatever. And I had just moved in and I wanted to do some more research into this. I'd been about a year into doing the Badgerland Legends thing. And I thought, okay, I got to be able to scrape off a couple good stories from this new place that I lived. So I threw this out to the Facebook group and I said, we recently moved to the area. Whenever I move someplace new, I like to do a little research on the history. And since fall will be here soon, I thought it might be fun to dive into some legends and lore around the greater Wanakee area. Any haunted bars, restaurants, buried treasure tales, UFO sightings, or obscure history. And this little thread got like 71 positive comments, where most people are fighting about politics. Everybody was engaged on this. So I was like, okay, I struck gold here. So within that exploration, I found a UFO sighting that was historic. I found the place where Ed Gein spent his final days. I found the largest Thunderbird effigy mound in the world, a tuberculosis sanitarium, a haunted woods that's right behind it, a legend of a midnight rider. And here is a little screenshot here for those that are joining us via YouTube of the news article that came out in 1986 of a police, two police officers that reported or responded to a report of a UFO sighting. And it turns out it was literally like 2 blocks from where I live now. So had I been there at the time, I would have saw it. Wow. And then I found another story about a haunted house that's been historically haunted right in my town. So I thought, okay, this is cool in Wanakee. And I know just outside of my little Wanakee map here, I found a lake monster legend in each of Madison's 4 lakes. I found a story about witches on a popular little peninsula that juts out into Lake Mendota called the Witches of Picnic Point. UW-Madison is chock full of ghost stories. I found haunted theaters, bars, restaurants, the largest Indian mound complex in the world right here in Madison. I think if you've pulled, 100 Madison residents, maybe 5 or 6 would be able to tell you that. So it's not well known here. A lost city in the UW's Arboretum, pretty much a housing development that went up, but it was taken by the swamp. So they didn't do very good planning, and they planned to do this awesome new subdivision in the 1920s, but it ended up getting sunk in the muck, literally.
Like a whole built building, or like just the structure?
Like a neighborhood with foundations. I have yet to explore it. I'm planning on doing that before the snow flies here. And now that all the foliage is coming down, and actually going to find it.
Are they completely sunken, or are they half sunken? Like what?
So what happened is it's very marshy on one edge of the city. You talked about the water. There's a lot of springs, and they had planned to do this housing development, but they did not plan the drainage canals properly. So when they started building the houses, putting in the foundations, the foundations started to shift. And before they could really get anything established, it was taken back by nature.
Gotcha. Okay. So we're not talking about like, you're going to walk in there and there's going to be a rooftop on ground level because the whole house is sunk into a swamp. Okay.
No, it was pretty well established, but it's still cool to go find the ruins.
Well, I'm almost certain there are places like that where the swamp absorbs a whole house, and you like walk by it and it's like, what used to be the second floor is underground and you could see the roof, right? I'm not just imagining things. I'm pretty sure that swamps can eat whole houses like that, like in Florida and whatnot with those sinkholes, right?
With the sinkholes in the, when you grew up in the 80s, your biggest threat was either Sasquatch or quicksand. That's how you were going to die. It's kind of the trope on every 80s TV show.
I used to think when I was a kid, if I wasn't careful, we might come across quicksand in the woods. Yeah. So who knows?
So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So you're probably thinking, well, Jeff, Madison's weird, but can you really expect me to find this weird stuff in my hometown? So I took my hometown, and I grew up about 90 minutes north of Madison, a small kind of, it was a paper manufacturing town. A lot of the towns in Wisconsin on the rivers had paper plants, and that's what we were known for. And it was a small town, kind of an idyllic Wisconsin town, only 18,000 people, low crime. And I thought, well, if this is true, I should be able to find more stuff from my hometown. And after just a little digging, I found a haunted mansion that's now a bed and breakfast, a haunted schoolhouse, a big cat flap from the 1950s where people were spotting lions roaming about the countryside of central Wisconsin. People thought, oh, it must have been a circus wagon that derailed. Other people thought it escaped from the zoo. But as soon as those came out, they quickly vanished. So it's hard to know what that was, but it captured the attention of the newspaper in town, and you can still read the reports. I found a murder brothel with a tie or speculation to Ed Gein, an infamous place they called Boy Scout Lane, and then another haunted tavern that was once a brothel, as well as a historic, it's called the Cottage Cafe, that was written about in several kind of haunted Wisconsin books, right in my hometown. So I was like, okay,
what's
the weird
infamous
is all around you.
I don't mean to pause. And yes, absolutely. What's infamous about Boy Scout Lane? Is that like
Boy Scout Lane? So the legend of Boy Scout Lane varies by who's telling it. But apparently a group of Boy Scouts went to Boy Scout Lane to camp out. And in some tellings of the legend, they disappeared with no trace. Others say they were either murdered by their scoutmaster or the bus driver. Now, I think it's a flight of fancy because I haven't been able to find any historical account. And if a bunch of Boy Scouts got slaughtered, it definitely would make the papers. But it's supposed to be a place of anomalous activity. People go out there and they see the will-o'-the-wisp phenomenon, like flashlights or lanterns coming through there. So I almost wonder if people had gone to that Boy Scout Lane and saw the name and then had the encounters with that will-o'-the-wisp phenomenon and grafted on the tale.
Right.
I haven't quite been able to dig to the bottom of that, but I found it compelling that it's whenever you see those listicles come out where it's like top 8 haunted places in Wisconsin, Boy Scout Lane is always listed in there.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting the point you're making. Like, you know, people think, oh, well, I don't live in Wisconsin, so what does this matter to me? But to your point, I mean, you took 2 random places that are really significant solely to you, maybe not the ordinary average person who's not from Wisconsin, or even someone who's from Wisconsin. I mean, you took 2 places and said, okay, let me find it, you know, and you did. One thing that came to mind, and I'm not sure if you're going to cover this later on, is the Beast of Bray Road. You mentioned that there were a bunch of big cat sightings at some point in time in Wisconsin. And this, for whatever reason, has always stuck with me. I learned about the Beast of Bray Road, and some have explained it as a werewolf, but other people have described it as a large cat, like a large black panther. So it's interesting that you have these like large canine and large feline sightings in a place that has very cold winters. We're not typically known to have those types of creatures in these biomes. So yeah, wow.
Yeah, and the Beast of Bray Road phenomenon is so I grew up in the central part of the state, and that phenomenon is in the southeastern part of the state.
Yeah.
And it goes through a region called the Kettle Moraine. And it's kind of on almost like a fault line. It's the 2 lobes of glaciation. I believe the Great Lakes and the Green Bay lobe. So it's kind of in a liminal place. And the sightings of the Beast of Bray Road go back to the 30s. And they start at a Catholic convent where a night watchman stumbled upon this beast on top of a Indian burial mound. And he had stumbled across it And as soon as he saw it, it kind of scampered off. And he thought that was odd. So he went back that following night at the same time with nothing but his trusty flashlight. And when he got to that mound, he saw that creature, and he described it as like a wolf-like creature, and it was pawing at the top of the Indian mound. And he locked eyes with it, and he thought he was in for good. And he was a Catholic man, and he was at a Catholic convent, and he said a prayer to the Lord in his head, and the creature tucked tail and walked away. So he feels like there was some providence there that by praying, it warded it off. And being on top of an Indian mound, raking, it makes kind of ties to the Anubis type creatures, or even like the hellhounds or devil dogs, or some kind of protector of either burial grounds or, like an ethereal hell. So from that get-go, it was kind of launched into this kind of Christian worldview. And then in the late 80s and 1990s, around Bray Road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, just a tiny little farming community, kind of an idyllic little hometown, people started seeing this wolf-like creature roaming the countryside. But it said instead of the rear legs moving forward, they were actually backwards. Or actually, I got that backwards. Instead of going backwards like a canine, they were going forward like a human. And it said it could walk on two upright legs. So Linda Godfrey, who is an author, she started writing about this, and it caught fire. And ever since then, people have been seeing the Wisconsin Dogman. Now, I got to visit Bowers Road, which is an intersecting road of Bray Road. And this is a guy named Lee Hample. He owns the barn and the field behind it where the Bray Road beast has been sighted most of the time. And he has, most people thought, okay, well, this is some kind of unidentified animal. The stuff that he's captured on trail cams defies explanation. Everything from UFO phenomenon to strange mists, orbs, mysterious glowing eyes. It's quite the paranormal soup what's going on right there on Bray Road. So it's something that's still being explored and seen today, something he's documented through putting out roadkill in his field in front of trail cams, and the cameras malfunctioning and the roadkill going missing. Just it kind of blows your mind, and there's something definitely weird going on there.
Yeah, that is one of the big things that you hear is like, well, why don't we catch these things on trail cams? But I think we do. I think what we do realize is that these beings are so aware that they're not just going to go and blindside themselves on a trail cam. They're so aware of it that maybe we can catch a glimpse of their eye shine. But for the most part, whatever they're in touch with has the ability to cancel that device out, whether it's something that's going on psychically, electronically. Maybe it's just, maybe there is a material explanation for it that some skeptic might propose. But I would say, the simple explanation is these beings, they know when a camera's out there, and they're, maybe they're taking it as a risk or reward situation where they're like, well, I could possibly get more attention on myself by going after this easy kill here. So I'm going to have to do something to this camera somehow, like they're smart enough to know, don't get seen, don't get sighted. Or maybe it goes and defies that, where it's a consciousness thing that for whatever reason as human beings, our vibration doesn't allow us to witness that type of entity. It's existing in a higher dimension simultaneously, and maybe has the ability to go back and forth when it needs to.
Yeah, and just the paradox is on its face, where it's like, okay, well, if it is the spiritual non-corporeal being, why does it go after roadkill?
Right.
Yeah. And he's got like mutilated carcasses. He's got like 150-pound deer that are like bent in weird ways and dragged without any evidence. And he's got pictures of these footprints going halfway into a field on a snowy field and then just disappearing. So it's like, well, did it get abducted by a spaceship? Like, what's going on here? And then he has one picture that shows some kind of wolf-like being inside of like an orb. So it's just like, what is going on here? Nothing, it defies explanation. So it's something that I kind of laughed off when I first heard it, but then actually going to his farm and seeing his evidence, I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm going, full on Wisconsin werewolf, but there's something strange going on here that deserves more study.
Absolutely.
And I didn't have any encounters myself on the land. I only spent, a few hours walking around back there and kind of trying to take it in, but definitely an anomalous place and definitely want to go back.
Well, and do you think that there's a part of intention that negates somebody who's already aware of what's going on there from experiencing it? Like, because it seems like a lot of the experiencers are people who have never learned about these types of things. For the most part, people who are writing books and whatnot, they're going to other people to find out what's going on because they themselves haven't. I mean, there are some exceptions to that for sure, but do you yourself find that like because you haven't experienced anything, it could be because like you're already seeking this type of thing?
So are you saying that because I'm looking for it, it's elusive?
That could be one, and
Okay.
I might be taking an overstep and saying that you haven't experienced anything because you said you
No,
only haven't.
I haven't in that specific phenomenon, and
Right.
and I notice I have a local author who he likes to go to these different places and do like supernatural dares, and he wrote a book about it, Supernatural Dares of the Midwest by Chad Lewis. Check it out; it's pretty cool. But he goes to these places and he does like short little YouTube videos and talks about the folklore of the place and the dare, and then he does the dare. But he, in like 30 plus years of doing this, he's had almost no encounters. So I find it interesting how fleeting this stuff can be and almost elusive.
Right. Like almost like because he's expecting something, he gets nothing, right? Whereas somebody who's just going about their normal daily business, maybe they heard a legend or something when they're a kid, but it's not on the forefront of their mind. They go down the road and this thing scares the crap out of them. And, half of them wants to never say anything about it because it's so out there that they're, and I think that's a part of it where these beings are like, well, they're too scared. They're never going to say anything about it. But when a researcher comes along, it's almost like a intellectual bravery, right? You're like, you're like challenging this creature in a way. And they're more likely to just be like, all right, I'm going to avoid this entity at all costs because they have some sort of maybe level up as opposed to the average unaware person who's just, like I said, floating through, going about their daily business, focused on, earthly things.
Yeah. And, talking and listening to people that have experienced, bizarre things, 14 phenomenon, most of the time it's like you said, they're not looking for it. And when it happens to them, it doesn't scare them. It leaves them with like a sense of like puzzlement or wonder. Like, what did I just witness? Did I really see that? Can I believe my eyes? And, if they're not with somebody else, they might just discount it entirely.
Right.
And I know that when strange things have happened to me, it's usually when I least expect them as well.
Yeah, it's definitely elusive. I think he really nailed it with that word. So you looked into Wisconsin Rapids. You found that it's pretty all over the place, hidden in plain sight, so to speak. What did you find next? Where are we going next with this presentation?
So I just wanted to give people some resources or tools if they wanted to either experience this stuff for themselves or, dig deeper into theirs. Maybe they're looking to prepare a presentation for Esoteric America, or they just want to catalog the stuff around them. So obviously, I know you're a huge collector of books. If you can see behind me on my camera, I have a whole bookshelf full of Wisconsin related books. And I've just started collecting these probably about 20 years ago, and then just started writing on these about 3 years ago. So I pick up anything that's out of the ordinary related to Wisconsin, anything Wisconsin historical, and then just kind of file them for another day. And then I actually found a good friend of mine, Frank Anderson, put together a visual representation of the myths, monsters, and legends of Wisconsin. And I have this poster hanging on my wall right now, and I go to it often. And he wanted to show all of this folklore in a visual frame. So he kind of drew up this map and he sells it on his Etsy store. So anybody that's a fan of Wisconsin, definitely go out and support a local artist on that.
Yeah, very cool. That's Frank Anderson. Is that what it is?
Frank Anderson, yeah.
Right on. Very cool. Yeah, this is stellar. This is kind of like what I look for when I'm putting together the artwork for the Esoteric America show, like that kind of nostalgic map style, where it kind of shows you what's going on in the state visually. So, wow, I mean, this is chock full, and I'm seeing like a few characters repeating. So obviously we got some Sasquatch sightings up in the north. Who's this gold character with what looks like antlers? Have we talked about
this one right here?
Yeah.
That is a good question. Let me look at the actual map here, Mark.
Yeah, go for it. As Jeff's looking at this, the character is featured all across the southwest portion of the state here. He's all along the southwest. I know you couldn't hear me there, Jeff.
It looks like a humanoid figure, but it's actually a depiction of petroglyphs or rock art.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so these are all places where there are petroglyph arts.
Yep.
Cool. Very cool. And there's some Sasquatch sightings sort of near one of them, but who's this tall red gentleman? Is that the effigy mound you showed us in Esoteric?
This guy right here is the manned mound. So if you want more information about that, Esoteric America, it is the only anthropomorphic effigy mound left in North America. And I haven't found anything else listed in the world, but according to official record, it's the only effigy mound depicting a man left in the world. And I believe when Europeans first settled Wisconsin, there was up to 5 of these.
Wow.
And unfortunately, most of them were either lost to time or plowed under.
Do we have any idea of possible locations for those other 5 or other 4?
There were 4 others, and I, off the top of my head, I don't know, just because.
And what river is this going right alongside of it to the east?
That is the Wisconsin River.
Right on. Okay.
Yep. So when I showed Wisconsin Rapids, much like Madison being split by the 2 lakes, Wisconsin Rapids is split by the Wisconsin River.
Okay.
And then to the west there, bordering the state, that is the Mississippi. And then we have a lot of other channels and estuaries throughout the state of Wisconsin, and those were very useful in early pioneering times for the timber trade. So lumberjack.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, this is a great map. I definitely would love to see, a better, higher quality image so we could read all the little things. But yeah, very cool, man. That's an awesome thing to have on your wall. A great thing for anyone in Wisconsin to buy.
Yeah. And I think by kind of laying this psychogeographic landscape onto a map, it helps you connect with your place better as well. So
Right.
that's one thing I recommend people do. And then one other thing I'm captivated by are historical markers. And whenever I see, and I'm not sure how it is in New England, but in Wisconsin, whenever there's a historical marker along a highway, there will be a little green sign about a mile away, and it'll say historical marker ahead. So I'll be driving in the car and I'll see the historical marker ahead, and I'll either have to pull in to the little parking lot and take a picture or crane my neck around to see what it's about. And I think these are great because a lot of times they contain some information about a place that's been lost to time. And I think they're a great source of this, and it's as well as a great placeholder to remember. So when COVID first hit, couldn't really go anywhere, couldn't really do anything. Everything was closed down. All of our state parks, all of our county parks were closed down. So finding ourselves bored, me and my family, we decided to hop in the car and explore a lot of these back roads of Wisconsin. And I stumbled upon this sign for Haney's Tavern. And I had probably driven past it about 50 or 60 times and never stopped to actually look at it. And I did a little more research on it. And it turns out, as the legend goes on the sign, that this guy by the name of Barry Haney, he shot one of his workmen. His name was Joe Pelkey. He felt remorse for what he did, so he gave him a place to stay in his tavern and nursed him back to health. Well, there's a darker version of that legend, and I haven't been able to corroborate one way or another. The darker version is that Haney shot him, buried him beneath the floors of the tavern, and Pelkey's spirit is still in Haney's Tavern. Well, since then, so the actual Haney's Tavern still stands today, but it's a private residence. And now when COVID first kicked off and I found this, I couldn't exactly go knock on the guy's door and be like, hey, did you know you're sitting on the oldest building in all of Wisconsin? So it's something I kind of want to do, but I don't really want to bug the guy.
Oh man, well, I mean, maybe he already knows, but yeah, sure. Wow, you should go over there and at least leave a letter and say, hey, I'm interested in talking to you about your property.
Yeah, and I used to live not too far from it, so I might have to leave one of my cards in his mailbox and see if I can get him to respond to me.
Yeah, please do.
Yep. So other, kind of the run of the mill places to find this stuff. Obviously, Facebook, Instagram. I shared that post that I put into that group and got the responses. Atlas Obscura is a great compilation of all of this weird stuff in one place, and you can do it by zip code or city. And I found stuff that I didn't even know about in Atlas Obscura. Now, Mark, have you heard of Liminal Earth? Liminal.earth?
I just wrote it down. It sounds cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of in beta still, and it's an open source place for people to document their weird sightings. So they can say, anonymously, they could say, oh, I was walking in this trail and I had this encounter with, a being, or I saw a ghost while I was doing this, or I was here and we were looking at the stars and I saw a UFO. So through that, maybe people can recognize patterns. So I find that helpful. Obviously, Reddit is kind of a cesspool these days. Only in your state, a lot of kind of listicles or kind of fluff articles about stuff, but it'll at least give you a place to start. Wisconsin, and I'm sure New England, and probably anywhere else in the country, has great regional sites like WisconsinHauntedHouse.com or Wisconsin Frights or WisconsinLegends.com. Even just Google haunted places near me, and you'll be surprised what you find. I've able to find a lot of these places, kind of dig into it, corroborate them via, old newspaper articles, other writings, or get connected with other people that do similar research into this stuff through a lot of this, just internet sleuthing. The other thing I use is tours. Now, I know New England's probably got a lot of these historic tours. I know Mark, if you tip him well enough, he'll take you on a tour of New Haven. Uncle Mike does the Susquehanna tours. A lot of these people will offer these great tours, and they will know so much. Even if it's just about the history, they might have one or two stories about legends or lore that they can kind of fill in. And then my buddy Mike runs a ghost tour company called American Ghost Walks, and I guess the busiest part of his season kind of wrapped up around the Halloween area. But there's a lot of people collecting this stuff. They're happy to share it, and it's really regional, location-based legend stuff that you can go and experience and look into deeper. And then your local historical societies. Now, when I think of a historical society, I think of like a 70-year-old woman retiree with nothing more to do. So what more could you do than to go there and talk to her about the history of the place? And then, if you get comfortable enough, you can ask her about the legends, the lore, the ghost stories, treasure tales, anything like that. And a lot of times they're happy to look into this stuff for you. Sometimes they brush you off and they don't only want to talk about historical fact, but most of the time they're willing to entertain you. And a lot of these places, they receive funding from either hosting events at places or during tours, or they rely on donations. So if you can bring attention to their causes in a respectful way, a lot of times they're open to, either ghost lectures or ghost tours or ghost hunts within these historic places. Anything to add there, Mark?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I love it. I think I've always been a little bit opposed to the last one, but I shouldn't be. There's no reason why. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe just being rebellious and contrarian. You're like, oh, what are these old people going to tell me that I can't find in a book? But there's a lot of stuff that you're not going to find in books that someone may hide in their memory or hold in their memory.
Yeah, they might know a guy who knows a guy who had something weird happen.
Yeah, well, and also there's so many resources that may not be publicly available that someone in a position like that might have. So, yeah, I just, in particular, Tara and I, we're going to go visit this American Indian Institute, something like that. And at first I was thinking, oh, maybe they'll know all about these stone structures, but then when I looked on the website, I was a little disappointed to see nothing about the stone structures. So I don't want to go there and be contrarian, but I do want to go there and ask them about it. But I'd hate to find myself in a position where they're like, oh, well, that's not historical fact. Because I know myself, I'd want to argue and prove them wrong.
Yeah, and legends, just the term itself, is kind of that gray area between historical fact and folklore. And that's kind of where the magic is, right between okay, we can't corroborate this with historical account, but we can kind of get clues into what actually happened. And I think that's where the fun is. So one of the things that I've done, and I don't recommend it to everybody, but I was up in Door County. It's Wisconsin's thumb. It's the little peninsula that juts off just north of Green Bay. And it's a beautiful place. They call it the Wisconsin's Cape Cod. It's a cherry growing region. They do lots of wine, tourism. They have lighthouses. And I went to this place called the Canna Island Lighthouse. And I believe it's probably the first or second most visited lighthouse in Door County, and maybe in Wisconsin too. But you either take like a wagon train across this little strait of Lake Michigan, you get to this little island, and there's this, they have a visitor center that's modern, but then they have the historic lighthouse, the lighthouse structure, as well as where the lightkeeper lives. So I wanted to walk up into the lighthouse, and you buy a ticket, you stand in line there, you wait for people to go up, come back down. And once it's your turn, you walk up there. So while we were waiting in line, I went to the guy standing there and asked him if there was any ghost stories about the old lighthouse or the island. And he said, I've never seen anything. I don't know. I don't believe in that. So I just dropped it and I moved on. So I get in the lighthouse. I walk up the 100 steps or so in the interior. I get to the top. I walk around the catwalk. I take a look at the historic mirrored light up there. It's like over 100 years old, and it's the original light and mirror. And then there was one more docent at the top there. And I thought, rather than just asking outright about a ghost story, I kind of embellished and I said, I've heard the old lightkeeper still likes to keep watch of his old light. Have you had any experience with him? And she kind of looked at me and then looked away and looked back at me. And she said, well, I have a friend who's into paranormal investigation, and I brought her out here. And we got some EVPs and some EMF spikes. And while walking through the house, from there, if you're looking at the picture here, from the main house to this little vestibule, she felt kind of a shock. And she thought that was peculiar. She felt like something kind of went through her. So she did some more historical research to find out that the lighthouse keeper's wife died of a heart attack right there. So she thought, well, there's something here. So without embellishing or coming up with my own ghost story, I probably wouldn't have gathered this little ghost tale, because it's easy to say, is there any ghost here? Nope. Move along. But if you're tantalizing enough, if you weave enough of a good story, you might cash in on a nice personal account like that. So
Great
I wouldn't
point.
recognize maybe falsifying something, but maybe coaxing it out of them with a little fun.
Yeah, well, maybe that explains why that guy was so skeptical. His coworkers bringing all kinds of ghost people around. He's probably like,
Yeah, probably
I'm
doesn't
sick
want
of
the
this.
attention.
I'm sick of this.
Yeah.
You found the person who does know. That's cool. Yeah, definitely good advice. And you definitely don't want to go on putting up a front, right? Like, we don't want to go and relay too much suspicion. So yeah,
Yeah.
embellish a little bit. I like
Embellish
that.
a little bit. And then, I kind of thought more towards, the broader reason that we like these ghost stories. And I kind of came up with this. We like ghost lore because it helps us remember history. It's a way to bring history into the present. Ghosts anchor the past to the present, and they don't allow us to forget and just move on. So I think that is kind of the utility and the allure, at least to me, about ghost stories and ghost lore is it's almost like the past calling us to the present, saying, hey, don't forget about me. There was somebody before you that lived on this earth, and you never know, in 100 years you might be a ghost.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
So some of the methodologies that I really enjoy is a concept called psychogeography. And it's simply the effect that geography or place or a building has on your psychology. And its focus is on architecture, history, and forgotten culture. And psychogeographers, they advocate that the act of becoming lost in your own town. And I kind of like that concept. They talk about these drifts or romantic strolls through your city. They talk about re-enchanting marginalized places through urban exploration, study of ancient cultures and practices, and then researching your local lore. So the one thing they talk about are these drifts or these romantic strolls. And they talk about doing them in your own town. So I kind of thought about this concept when me and my daughter, she was about 4 at the time, we decided to take a walk through our neighborhood. And about halfway through our walk, she started complaining about, being tired and her leg hurting. And right where we stopped, I looked up and I saw this beautiful old, it's probably 100-year-old weeping willow tree. And ever since I was a young boy, I've always liked kind of the moody look of a weeping willow, just kind of the droopy branches. And I've always wanted to have one in my yard. And then when we stopped, I looked up and I told her that story about how I like that tree. And I've always wanted one. And, I don't have one in my yard, but hey, here's one right in my neighborhood and I can enjoy it on my walks with my daughter. And then we looked down and we found a maple leaf. And I said, oh, hey, Isla, do you know what leaf this is? This is a maple leaf. And what do you use maple trees for? And she didn't know. And I said, well, the syrup that you put on your pancakes is maple syrup. And then she got excited about that. And then we kept walking. And then she found another leaf and it was an ash tree. And I said, well, ash trees are great. Do you know what they're used for? I said, people use them to build baseball bats. And, maple and ash trees are the most common woods that they use in baseball bats. So you have a maple tree and you have an ash tree. And, we talked about an acorn and how an acorn, when planted, will grow into a big oak tree. And it starts with this. And we kind of talked about the magic that happens with this little tiny acorn and how it grows into this big tree. And then we saw the little whirly birds from the maple trees. And I told her about that. And I said, this is how the trees kind of spread their seeds, because the wind blows and these little whirly bird helicopters go flying through the air, and then birds or animals will pick them up, eat them, and then, a tree will be planted. And then she was kind of captivated by the world around her. She forgot that she was tired. She forgot that her legs were hurt. She was looking at her neighborhood as it was a completely different place, a more magical realm where things existed that she had never noticed. So I think it's easy to, just see plywood houses and paved streets with curbs and gutters and think nothing more than, oh, that's where those neighbors that we don't like live, or that's where the dog always runs out and barks at us, and actually look at it as a magical place. So I think there's some utility in kind of reframing the world around you, learning more about it, and just looking at that nature has its utility.
Yeah.
And then go ahead, Mark.
No, that's amazing. Yeah. Well said.
And then the other thing about romantic strolls. So I used to work in an office. We used to work in a cubicle in front of, the boxes, my thesis on boxes, and just hated that job. And it was pain in the ass. I didn't like going. I drive out of my driveway in my truck. I take a right. I take another right. I take a left, and I take a right into the parking lot. It was the most boring, mundane commute to my terrible job. Well, one day, it was a nice spring day, and I saw my motorcycle parked there, and I thought, well, I'm going to take my motorcycle instead. So instead of taking a right, I took a left, and I took another left. I found a long, winding road, and I rode down there, and I had a smile on my face, went through some twisties, and then finally got to work. It probably took me twice as long as my normal commute, but by the time I got there, I had a huge grin on my face and a spring in my step because I had a great time on my commute, and it changed my tone for the whole day. And it was just that one simple act of taking a left instead of taking a right, kind of reframing my worldview around my commute that really set the tone for my whole day. And then there's another thing that I was sent recently, and it was called The Scene. And then it is called the Synchro-Mystic Exploration of the Ever Expanding Now. And the author is on the line with me right now. Mark, would you like to tell us about the scene?
No, you're explaining a lot of what we talk about in the scene. So yeah, it's this is the intention, and I'm really grateful that you've picked up on it. That's one of the ways that you can get yourself into that dreaming consciousness is just by stepping out of your routine, and that's exactly what you just described. Two different styles, and I like the familial connection to you and your daughter. You know, like that's something as a young man without kids I can't express from my own experience, but I know many people who pick this scene up probably have kids themselves. A lot of the folks that listen to the show reach out to me, and I'm always surprised to find out many of them are young fathers or young mothers. So yeah, it's awesome. I don't know. I mean, the scene speaks for itself, right? I mean, I've talked about it so much on this show that people should understand the concept. It inspired my friend Juan to start the Occultist Monday zine, which is another kind of continuation of this. And yeah, I think this is one example of where you can sort of take your own intention and crystallize it to do exactly what you described earlier in the show, which is spur a bunch of research. You know, maybe it's not supernatural, paranormal, conspiracy related, doesn't necessarily have to be that. But that's what we're talking about here. And that's the most fun, in my opinion, is to go and look at the historical stuff and connect it to the weird. So, yeah,
absolutely.
the scene is the link will be in the description. It's in the description of every episode. So if you want a copy, go check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pick it up. I think it's useful. I have yet to follow the exact process that Mark did, but I was happy to receive it, look through it, and kind of reframe some of the methods I use. So I wanted to definitely include it in there. And now, Mark, are you a randonaut?
Yeah, I've downloaded the app. I'm interested to see if this is like an update that they've done, because when I used the app, when I first heard about it, nothing happened. I mean, literally nothing happened. It's not that I followed the instructions and went to a place and nothing happened. The app wouldn't work for me. Like it just wouldn't work. So I've never had a positive experience with the Randonautica app. That's just my experience. I'm not trying to diss this company because they are, I don't know, they used to be associated with someone that I had on the show before, so I know he worked with them for a little bit of time, and then they parted ways, and now he's like kind of like hesitant to talk about it, hence why I didn't even mention his name.
Okay.
So that to me personally is a red flag, you know, not that it's a red flag for the app or that person. It's just like doesn't seem like something that's congruent with my experience, you know, which is why I kind of wrote what the scene is all about. Like the scene literally gives you the tools to do what Randonautica does without your phone. And you could use your phone in tandem for better purposes, at least in my opinion, with the scene process. So it's not that the two are like opposed to one another. You could probably even figure out a way to use scene and Randonautica in conjunction. But yeah, I just never trusted this idea that well, at first I did, but after the app didn't like work for me, I started to get suspicious, and I'm like, you know, oh, is it because I'm not in a big city or something? Is that, you know, but I live close enough to two pretty big cities that you'd think there'd be something going on here.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know what's going on with this app.
Yeah, I would like to maybe get some feedback from the audience on this one, but you know, I haven't used it since April, and I had used it and got intrigued when it first came out. I think it came out early in 2020, and the time that I used it, I was actually led to a place in my neighborhood. I set the intention of I want to see something legendary, And I came across what I believe was an Indian mound. Now, being in Madison, being in the biggest mound complex in the world, it's nothing out of the ordinary. But to see, this hill rise up in front of me, I thought, okay, that's peculiar. But people that have used this app have claimed to find a friendly dog in the middle of the desert, a field of wildflowers where they weren't expecting, and one lady even helped. It even helped her make a decision on what college to go to. So I'd be curious to see from your community if anybody has had success with the app. I know the last time I used it in April, it took me off onto a couple dead end roads that were private property. So that's where my journey ended, because I wasn't about to trespass. So that's mine. I would say, hey, give it a try. If it works for you, use it. If not, throw it out. I definitely advocate visiting sacred sites. Now, the two most notable sacred sites near me are Astalon, which is just east of Madison. And then we talked about Man Mount, which is just north of Madison. Go to these sites, learn more about them, think about the people, think about their daily lives, what they've done, and try to experience what it was like in their life. And that's something that I try to do. And it kind of keeps me in tune with place. And my friend Amelia actually went to Man Mount and had an interesting experience. She went in the middle of winter, and she had driven her car there with her now husband. I think he was a boyfriend at the time. And when they got out there to see it, they heard some weird, inhuman growling coming from some of the bushes around it. And they got spooked out, and they got back into their car, and then their car wouldn't start. And she started to lose it. And she ended up flagging down somebody coming down the local road. And he ended up, stopping, talking to them. She's like, oh, my car won't start. And she was kind of frazzled. And then he's like, oh, let me try it. And then, of course, it started up. So it was kind of one of those weird encounters you hear about in a lot of paranormal where the car won't start. So definitely some energy there. Go to these places, see if you can have an experiences. At least in Wisconsin, a lot of these sites are on public property. So you can actually go and walk up the steps of this mound at Astalon, or go experience Man Mount, or go visit a number of effigy mounds within Madison, all on, Madison parks or Dane County parks.
Yeah.
And then legend trips. So what's a legend trip? It's practice that involves a pilgrimage, usually covert, to a site that has a reputation for being haunted, supernaturally inclined, or associated with a tragedy. Now, I thought that legend trips were just what American, mostly white teenagers did. But doing the research on this, I found that Japan has a similar practice, and it's called a Kimodameshi. Now, Kimodameshi is a Japanese tradition that involves a group activity where adolescents take a journey to a cemetery, haunted house, or forest. Now, where the Americans, usually it's to one of these places just to get like a thrill or a fright night. But the Japanese are more intentional with theirs. They want you to carry out a specific mission as a team to reinforce that as a team, individuals can overcome their fears. So it's definitely a rite of passage for a lot of these Japanese teenagers to go on these Kimodomeshis. Now, some of the places or sites that are involved in these legend trips are marginal or liminal places. A lot of times they're associated with legends and lore. A lot of times they contain a landmark or object that's said to hold a curse, which is captivating in itself. or associated with a tragedy. Now, why do we legend trip? Now, the West is devoid of rites of passage, initiation, especially for young men. And I can only talk from the male perspective because it seems like adolescence has gotten stretched out so far that it can go from 12 to 21 and to sometimes, 13 to 40 before you actually feel like a man. And I think for me personally, my rite of passage was becoming a father, and I didn't do that until I was 35. So it's easy to kind of get lost in this adolescence. And, something that a lot of these legend trips can do is kind of be part of that process from going from youth to adult. So I think that's kind of an important structure of that. They help us connect with history, connect with others to gain empathy through facing our fears, and also gaining independence. And I think what I really think is they're part of a hero's journey. So your audience is probably no stranger to the hero's journey, where Joseph Campbell asserts that many stories contain fundamental similarities in theme, structure, and symbolism. And Campbell, he was convinced that a heroic journey or a pattern of a heroic journey was present in any story that was worth retelling. And I'm convinced that by taking part in these legend trips is you acting out the hero's journey. Because when you go on one of these legend trips, you're called to the adventure of going to a place and doing a specific thing. Going there, even though that you're scared, and actually being initiated in participating in the activity in the actual legend trip or paranormal dares I talked about. And then after that, having a transformation where you overcame that obstacle and then living to tell the tale of the legend. And then, of course, it's cyclical. So you're going to do it all over with your next adventure. So I think by doing these legend trips, they're really part of the human condition. And we've seen that they're not just an American phenomenon. They go back. I know when doing some research on this stuff, I found some links to Mark Twain was probably one of the first legend trippers. He talks about in the Tom Sawyer in his first novel about Tom going to a cemetery at midnight to perform a ritual to remove warts, and then also going to a cave to look for loot. So I think this is inherently a part of youth, and I think it's a part of the human condition that we need to experience the broader world around us. And if we can have a brush or encounter with something that is strange, supernatural, or out of the ordinary, I think it helps us because, you'll go through life, and for guys that don't talk about this stuff, people they're loath to talk about any mysterious encounter or any ghost, but usually when you get them one-on-one in a quiet situation, they said, well, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but this one time, and then they go on with some kind of fantastical story that you just didn't expect. So I guess that's kind of a side tangent there, but I think this is something that I want to tap into more, is going on legend trips and kind of exploring how this kind of fits into the hero's journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll say before I ever heard a podcast, I had a Spotify subscription and I got bored of listening to music, and I went and looked and saw what they had for like audio books and things like that. And they had the whole Joseph Campbell archive series. And
Nice.
I ended up listening to that over the summer while dishwashing and doing this other job that I had, and landscaping or driving. I can't remember which one back then, but yeah, that was pivotal to really reinforcing a lot of what we've talked about today. And yeah, very interesting stuff, Jeff. I think the hero's journey is something that everybody is on. You know, we
Mhm.
look at the word hero now, and we've been separated from it to think that a hero is somebody who is non-ordinary, but we all have a non-ordinary portion of ourselves. Our consciousness is heroic. It's mythic. So you're on a hero's journey. You, Jeff, everyone listening to this right now on the podcast, me, myself, Tara in the room, we're all on our hero's journey.
Yeah, definitely. So one other thing, another concept kind of in this broader realm are these things called micro adventures. Now, this was a term coined by a he is a National Geographic explorer. He goes by the name of Alistair Humphreys, and he says that you should go on adventures while you're working your 9 to 5 job. Go on these adventures from 5 until 9, and a couple of these things that he suggests are something as simple as sleeping out underneath the stars, or like I talked about with the drifts or the romantic strolls, taking a left-hand turn instead of a right, or just finding a sense of adventure in your ordinary life. And I think these can be therapeutic, especially in the age of technological overwhelm and just increased pressure, to actually take a night and sleep out under the stars. Now, I've been camping quite a few times, more so in my youth. I think there's only been one time that I've slept underneath the stars, but it just sounds like kind of a magical thing that's a bit antiquated now. So I'd almost like to kind of rebirth that idea of doing that, waking up in a meadow. Just sounds like a great thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Micro adventure. I like the phrasing there. That's really smart. Yeah, that's what we talk about in the scene, you know. This is all very parallel. I love it, you know. It's none of what I wrote in this scene is, wholly original to me. These are all concepts that anyone can tap into, and
Yeah,
yeah,
and almost universal in
yeah,
human nature.
exactly.
And then another thing that your audience will need no introduction to is Synchro-Mysticism. But I just kind of want to put a finer point on this as far as the definition. So the practice of attributing mystical or esoteric significance to mundane coincidences. Now, when I kind of read that, I thought, well, mundane, that's kind of a derogatory term. But then I got thinking to it, and I think the fact that they're mundane to anyone else is actually where the magic is in the experience, because it's only significant to you. And I think that's why synchronicities or synchro-mysticism is special on a personal level. Because if it was magical to everybody, I just think it won't be nearly as profound to you as an individual. But I was talking about, I was presenting a similar slideshow to this. We were talking about the Beast of Bray Road earlier. I did a Beast of Bray Road conference in April, and I was preparing a similar presentation with this slide, and I wanted an example of a synchronicity that happened to me recently. So I fired up the Randonautica app. I couldn't get anything there. And I was just kind of really searching hard for a synchro-mystic experience or a synchronicity to happen to me. So I had some errands to run before, and I had my earbuds in, and I was driving down the road, and I was listening to your handbook for the apocalypse. And it was one of probably the first episodes I tuned into, and you and Mike were talking about a synchronicity that you shared. And I was thinking, oh, that's really cool. So I pulled my truck into my driveway, and I still had my earbuds in, and it was trash day. And I was going to bring in the trash cans and grab the mail while I was out there. Now, I had seen this little strip of paper in my front yard, and especially on trash day, people's garbage will come flying out of their cans, and it's not unusual for a piece of litter to end up in my front lawn. So I saw this little piece of trash, and I probably walked by it 6 or 7 times between bringing in the trash cans in, walking to the mailbox, getting a letter. And then finally, I'm listening to you guys on the podcast in my ears talking about synchronicities. And I walked over, and mind you, I was looking to have a synchronistic experience that I could share in my slideshow the next day. And then I reached down and I picked up the little piece of paper, and it was a corner of an envelope, and it said Synchrony Bank, Orlando, Florida. Now, I am not a member of Synchrony Bank. I've never heard of it. I'm in Wisconsin. I would not bank with a bank in Florida because it's not regional to me. I don't know if my neighbor did work there, but I think it was kind of what Chris Knowles calls a sync wink. I was looking so hard for synchronicity, trying the Randonautica app, and then I was listening to you guys talk about synchronicities, and I reached down, and there is the word that shares both the root word with synchronicity and synchrony. So I thought that was kind of cool.
This seems even more so, I would say, like the word synchronicity mixed with the word irony.
Yeah, it's almost too blunt.
Yeah.
And if I still have this little strip of paper sitting on my desk here, and I took a picture and included in my slideshow because I thought this was just hilarious. And then the actual definition of synchrony, because I had never even heard that word before. Obviously, I've heard of synchronicity and Synchro-Mysticism and all that stuff, but synchrony is the way in 2 or more things happen, develop, move, etc. at the same time or speed. So I'm like, that is just fucking perfect. So right there on the little strip of paper that I walked by 6 or 7 times, and it wasn't until I was seeking it out and listening to you and Mike talk about this that it actually occurred. So I thought that was kind of profound, and thought that was a cool story to share with the class.
For sure. I feel like I heard this already, but maybe you talked about this when you're on Esoteric America. You might have mentioned it towards the end.
I think after it happened, I dropped you, and I am on Instagram.
Okay,
yeah.
good. Because if that wasn't the case, I was about to say, oh God, I've had a similar synchronicity.
No, I think it was that, but yeah. I figured that was we talked about synchronicities not being,
because this photo looks familiar. I think I even showed it to Mike. So
okay, very cool. Yeah, so I thought that was really cool how that kind of manifested itself, and it just seems like too significant not to be like, hey, and I like you're thinking synchronicity and irony right there in the name.
Right.
Very cool. So kind of winding down here, and one thing I know, Nathan Isaac from Pennyroyal, he talks about re-enchanting the land. And I think some practical ways for you to do that is by collecting and talking about folklore, especially local folklore. And one thing you can do that is by those historical markers. You can actually, at least in Wisconsin, you can file a petition to get a historical marker placed on a historical place. And preservation efforts, going out and seeing those historical societies and say, what are your preservation efforts? What are you trying to preserve, and how can I help? And then another thing called culture jamming. It's defined as a form of protest used by anti-consumerists to disrupt or subvert a media culture or a specific narrative. I think Timcast, they like to engage in this to kind of snub their nose at the ruling class. I think it's a really neat way of, without being overt, kind of slyly breaking mainstream paradigms and narratives. And I think that's kind kind of important thing for, if you feel called to do it, to at least look into. And then re-enchanting your life. Now I talked about, my walk with my daughter and kind of reframing the world around us. And one of these things, instead of just going out to run an errand, go on missions. Look for synchronicities and keep a log. Since the beginning of this year, I started keeping a synchronicity log. So whenever something happens to me, I'll just open my Evernote and drop the date and then just a brief description of what happened. And I don't know if you've experienced this, Mark, but I'll have synchronicities and I'll write them down and then I'll move along. And then I'll look at my log like a few weeks or months later and be like, oh yeah, I remember that, but like, I can't remember the specifics. Has that happened to you?
Absolutely. I chalk it up usually to just not having a great memory, though.
Yeah.
But I do. I
think
have a good memory.
yeah. And I think I do too, but and I always remember after, after looking at it and writing it down, but I couldn't tell you right now without looking at my file, like which ones I had that were significant other than what I just shared. So I think it's almost like a dream state where you'll come out of a dream and you'll remember, all the details. But as you become more and more awake, more and more of that slips away throughout the day. So I think there's something tied in between these synchronicities and this kind of dream state. Right. And the other thing I recommend, we talked about Randonautica, and you have more of a manual thing with your scene where you use a compass, disconnecting from that technology because we're inundated with it. We're always swimming in a sea or a soup of some form of technology. So if you can put your phone on silent or turn it off while you go out and explore these places, these marginal liminal spaces, I think you'll have better results kind of tuning in them. And then we talked about the map of the territory with that Frank Anderson put together. Mm-hmm. Even if it's a KML file on your computer, kind of like what I did with my map of Wanakee, mapping where the places where this thing happens, look for patterns. I think that kind of tunes us into place. And then another thing is do genealogy. Have you done much genealogy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I found some interesting things kind of about my family through looking through this. And I'd recommend, other people kind of finding the people that came before you. It seems like a lot of other cultures have always had oral traditions about their ancestors. And I think, in the modern world, we're kind of separated from that. So, pay honor to the people that came before you. I found out that it was my grandpa's grandpa came to Wisconsin from Germany as a migrant. He couldn't read or write English. He probably mostly spoke German, but he found himself in the wilds of Wisconsin. He ended up purchasing a plot of land, logging a bunch of the oak timber, working in a barrel stave factory, pretty much sawing down that same oak that he harvest from his land to make these barrels, getting paid on that, assembling a house and starting a farm. And, we think we have it rough when Starbucks gets our order wrong. And you think about, what old Fred Finup did on a little plot of land in the wilds of Wisconsin, where it's probably cold 4 or 5 months out of the year. And to think about what he did and just kind of to remember that in your pursuit of things, to pay honor to the people that came before you and, not let their efforts go to waste while you sit in front of, your computer and think about how terrible your life is.
Well said. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's my presentation for tonight, Mark.
Cool, man. Yeah, this is great. This is reaffirming a lot of the things that I've discovered And you've gone to show that you don't have to quit your job to re-enchant your life. That's what it took for me, but I never tried to discourage people from I've never encouraged people to, quit their job unless it made sense for them. But I don't know your background and what you do for work, but it seems like you've integrated all this stuff into your life regardless of that, and that's really cool, man. I appreciate you putting it all together and giving us a 101.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And just to kind of go into that background of the day to day, I very much worked that 7 to 4 p.m. job, that 9 to 5, that same window. But I decided, and I made a conscious effort to get into more of this stuff because I felt like it was kind of missing. So I would challenge other people that don't think they can do this between their job as a father or a husband or a wife, to actually kind of see how they can integrate some of this into their life and bring other people along for the ride. Because I think it's a great thing for just your overall health, and also it can reinforce relationships by exploring this stuff, talking about it, and exploring that. I know I've created a lot of great memories over the past few years, just exploring this stuff, going out, experiencing it, taking my kids, even though we might not have the same objectives. I'm looking for this weird stuff or researching, ancient cultures, going to Astalon and climbing on top of the pyramids, where they're just having a great time. So there's something in it for everybody. And as long as you can frame it as, going on an adventure, it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, pick up the scene, but Jeff, where could people go to support you? Obviously, Badgerland Legends on Instagram. Do you have a website? Yeah. Do you have anything that you plan on doing?
Yeah, check out the, if you like this kind of stuff, check out the Wisconsin Legend podcast.
Cool.
We've dropped 7 episodes so far. We're doing kind of a seasonal thing, but we're going to get this rolling here. Now that Mike's tour schedule is wrapping up, going to definitely dive into some deep dive topics. So far, we've covered Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer has been popular conversation right now. Wisconsin's werewolf. You want to hear more about that? We did a whole episode on the Bray Road. These little people in a place called Haunchyville, almost like circus dwarves. Really interesting kind of concept there. Devil's Lake, and then Wisconsin's oldest ghost, the Ridgeway Phantom. So give it a listen. If you like it, rate it, give it 5 stars. And then if you want to find me, Badgerland Legends, both on Instagram and Facebook, badgerlandlegends.com. And then check out this Wisconsin Legends group on Facebook if you want to, engage in more of what makes Wisconsin legendary.
Beautiful. Yeah, I don't usually use Facebook, but I got to go and see what the Connecticut groups are looking like. Maybe there's a Connecticut Legends group I could find, but very cool, Jeff. I love this. I love the inspiration that hopefully we have instilled in whoever's listening to go out and discover what's in their backyard. And of course, hit me up when you do, because we'd love to have you, like we had Jeff on our other show, Esoteric America. And from there, wherever else this goes. Jeff, I'm sure people are going to get in touch with you after hearing you on this show to have you on their own podcast. But this has been fun, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking time and hearing me out here.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know what to do. Go check out Badgerland Legends, Instagram, Facebook, or just go to the .com. And as for me, I'll catch you in the outro. Have a great moment wherever you are in the now.
My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, maybe. I'm a little extra terrestrial, trying to stay human in a cesspool of professionals. But I confess too much off of the tongue. All my aunties and my uncles shield the ears of the young. I be saying shit and they don't know where it's coming from. In like 100 years we went Zarbomba from guns. Check the facts, check the Fed, check the stars. Stanley Mines was murked for a water fuel cell car. They each their own, you can stick with your old ways, but eat the rich and drink the motherfucking Kool-Aid. And I can see the red on your lip stain. White skin, blue collar, pure American made. Fuck it, you can keep your blood-soaked heritage and run the soul off the moon landed narrative. Yeah, my girl thinks that I'm embarrassing. My folks think I'm nuts, but never question the parenting. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pack thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, 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 my family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. You might think that I'm off in the deep end. One too many Netflix docs on the weekends. But check the budget for a military defense. Tell me we ain't scared of something not within reason. Steel beams, another 1492. And 9/11 was the red, white, and blue. And you be lit off the floor riding, ain't got a clue. All your dreams just shit on a Rockefeller shoes. Don't believe a damn thing a politician ever said. Ain't one brick left to gold up in the Fed. They still got bricks of cocaine to make crack. Oxy's killing the working class, FDA's whack. Talking like this, got Ken talking behind backs. Too much to unpack, so they talk smack. And I'm just trying to converse with my clan, but it ain't fan. So I'm here setting up camp. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pack thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, 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 my family thinks I'm crazy. Maybe, 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 just maybe. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is you can't rule anything out. So, maybe I am.